questions and you want answers. Welcome to the Q&A show.
Good evening. It's my pleasure to be with you, and I'm sure it is yours too, to be with us here at Revelation TV on the Q&A show this evening on Monday night. It's really good to have special guests all the time on the Q&A show, and tonight's no exception. Philip Day, who's an author and also the founder of the Campaign for Truth and Medicine, is with us this evening. I'd like to welcome you, Philip.
Thank you, Howard. Good evening.
Let me just give a little bit more background on yourself. You, among the books that you've written, Health Wars, Cancer, Why We're Still Dying to Know the Truth, Food for Thought, Fabulous Foods That Won't Kill You. Interesting titles, play on words here, but there's a lot of seriousness behind all of this, isn't there, Philip? Because of what's happening, the governments are waking up, the doctors are now saying, look, hang on a sec, the health care that we have as great as it is in the United Kingdom is sort of overloaded, it's underfunded, etc. And there are more and more people that are having to be dealt with, especially when it's looking like at the moment there's a third of the population are obese. I mean, that's incredible high figures. In the last 30 years we've grown, if you like, literally to an overweight situation. But it's all not a matter of just the foods we're eating, it's really what we're doing to our bodies, what we're doing to ourselves. And there's so much to talk about in the 58 minutes that we have. So Philip, perhaps a little bit of background about yourself, just to make it clear to our viewers where you're coming from.
Well, I got involved in this from an early age. I suffered during my teens and early 20s. I was very overweight. I just didn't feel right most of the time. And it culminated on my 22nd birthday when a friend of mine took a look at me and he said, "You're blotting out the sun like a Darth Vader Death Star. Have a piece of fruit." And, you know, often a cruel jibe like that will really get through. And so I decided I was going to do something about my own situation. And I was very fortunate because this guy, I'd been to school with him, he had trained as a nutritional doctor, and we went outside and he just gave me the 15-minute speech, and that was it. It all changed from that point forward. And what I find fascinating, I've been doing this for 30 years now. I found a career. I was very lucky to have been put through one of the best educational systems in Britain. I was looking around for something to do with my life, and this just dropped in my lap. And isn't it so the case that it happens because of your personal experience? So after that, I realized that there was a huge number of people out there who simply were not being told that there was anything they could do for their situation. And that's really when the research started.
Now, particularly today, they're talking on the news about the amount of sugar that's in the soft drinks. Let's just start with something that, you know, is quite topical. We've known for a long time. We're going to look at a very short clip of something which we'll spell it out a little bit. We're going to just show 1 minute of this 3-minute clip. Have a look at this.
Have you ever stopped to think how much sugar is in your soft drink? For many people, soft drinks are the #1 source of sugar in their diet, and it's just empty calories. Do you realize drinking 1 soft drink a day for a year means almost 15 kilograms of added sugar?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
This translates into 54,750 kilocalories, or over 15 pounds of added weight.
Amazing, really, when you see something in the pictorial way that we're seeing here. You can't see that at your side, Philip, but it just a very nice looking woman suddenly puts on all of these calories in adding just sugar that's 10 teaspoonfuls to a small, I suppose, can of soft soda drink, which in its day probably would have sounded quite innocent to drink that. But today we're getting more and more evidence that just this alone is not only just adding incredible weight to our bodies, but also is killing us softly.
Well, I think it was there's a philosophical problem that comes out of this, and that is that we naturally assume that those things that we buy down at our supermarkets, somebody's checked them out. And it isn't just the sugary drinks. It's going to be the pork luncheon meat and anything else that we eat. And the makeups and the toothpaste. We just assume that somebody's checked this lot out before it goes into the supermarket, and that's simply not the case. And of course, this whole horse meat scandal that's been breaking recently, I think goes to underline, and it shocked a lot of people that really the system could be going so badly wrong on such a fundamental level. And the sugar is really just a symptom of a sick society that has just really been canoeing down that long river in Egypt called denial. And it's not just that, it's the fat, it's the alcohol, it's the cigarettes, it's everything. So this was what I faced, and I realized that the only thing to do would really be to give myself a 60,000-mile service, get myself up on the rack, get the lug nuts off, and really go through my lifestyle a bit and start making some changes. And if you can do this, the results are absolutely phenomenal. And with me, the weight just dropped off. As you see now, I have the body of a Greek god, Bacchus. But no, seriously, in the 30 years that I've done this, I've seen the dead get up and walk. I've seen people who have no business even sucking air for another 3 weeks with cancer who are alive and well and cancer-free today. And this is information they just would not have received, and indeed are not getting through the regular medical channels.
Now, putting a cynical hat on all of this, why do you think it is that the governments all of a sudden are sort of saying, well, look, maybe we need to tax the people? We're talking about soft drinks again in the news today. We'll put a 20% tax on it. Would that stop people? What is the motive behind the government wanting to take steps at this stage?
Governments love crises because it expands their purview and it gives them an opportunity to raise more money. It's as simple as that. If you can fabricate a crisis, and I'm not saying the sugar thing is a fabricated crisis, it's pretty real. But if you can draw people's attention to this whole thing, the whole aim of practical politics, as one philosopher said, is to keep the population alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by menacing it with an endless series of hobgoblins. And therefore government rides in on the white horse with the answer. You can taxing sin is good business for government because sin's always going to be there, and if you can make money out of it, so much the better. So it's a big racket. Sickness is big business. Nobody's making much money out of health. When we did the Food Matters project, I don't know if you've seen that documentary, it's an excellent documentary. In the Food Matters project, we've got doctors and researchers saying just that these crises are brought before the public so the public realizes how wicked they've been, and okay, well, we'll fork out to be able to get ourselves out of the trap.
But in this day and age of incredible austerity, those measures were to save money where they can. Surely that would be one of the motives for the government to save on the national health, as it were, because it looks like in the next 5 years or so that instead of 1 in 3 numbers of the UK are going to be obese, it's going to go to 1 in 2, 50%. So the costs on the NHS and the health service is just going to be incredible. So perhaps there's a more pragmatic view there that action has to be taken now.
Well, they definitely realise they've got a problem, Howard. If you stand back and look at what we're dying from these days, these are simply not the same diseases that were killing us 150 years ago. Back then it was cholera, diphtheria, smallpox, typhoid, that sort of thing, TB. Mm-hmm. Today we're dying of eating disorder diseases. We're dying, the top 6, last time I looked, were heart disease, cancer, stroke, pulmonary lung disorders, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. And it's interesting, when you look at Alzheimer's, that was named after Dr. Alois Alzheimer in 1909. So the next question you ask is, well, why wasn't it named Shakespeare's disease or King Canute's disease? It tells us that something about the disease, that it was noteworthy enough in 1909 for it to be given a name at that point. That was, of course, when we began the canning and industrial preparation of food. And today we're suffering from diseases. These top 6 are all diseases of chronic malnutrition. So although we have a high level of obesity in the population, what we've got is starvation going on. Malnutrition is the main issue that's going. These are all diseases of chronic malnutrition. And that surprises a lot of people when they come to see this, because during the study that I did for Health Wars, we've still got 18 cultures on the planet to whom these diseases are not only unknown, they don't even have a word for them.
That's a good
You've got
point.
literally hundreds of millions of people who don't, for instance, get breast cancer or prostate cancer. And so governments are in a bind now because on the one hand, they want to give the pharmaceutical industry free rein because in Britain, that's one of our major cash cows, the pharmaceutical industry is one of our major industries. But now they've got a problem because they're just running out of money and the problem is only heading one way. It's only getting worse.
Some would say, I dare say, that Middle Ages, people didn't live long enough to get Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah, they say that about cancer as well. But the simple fact is that if the problem were around, in fact, that argument doesn't really hold true because if you go back, I did a whole study on Saxon England, there were people living to 60, 70 years of age. And while I'm sure there were cases of dementia, it certainly wasn't noticeable enough to have been named or brought out in the records. Much like heart disease, that's a shocker to realize that 150 years ago, or even in the mid-1800s, heart disease was pretty unknown. It was really just a footnote of mild interest in medical texts, but it really began its surge once we came to the end of the 1800s, turned into the 20th century. That's when we started to see these problems really coming up, when we began the industrial preparation of food and food processing and canning, aluminium cans and so on, tin cans and that sort of thing. That's really when we began to see the problem occurring. And today, of course, we've got, when you stand back and take a look, Howard, if 1 in every 3.5 of us, if you can picture such a creature, is going to perish from cancer, that follows that we as a society are doing something fundamentally wrong. And if you see 1 in every 2.5 of us dying of heart disease, and in 50% of those deaths, the first symptom is death, that follows that we as a society are doing something fundamentally wrong. And that's where you've got to start. We're not failing on a complicated level here. We're failing on the most basic level possible. And that is we have a medical system that doesn't get trained in nutrition.
Yeah. Now, just to remind our viewers that this is an opportunity to email or text questions that you may have for Philip, and also any comments that you have. Please keep them short, otherwise we won't be able to include all of what you have to say. This is an opportunity really to get to know the truth, because what's your motive here, Philip, for the viewers' sake? What are you, somewhere also, again, there's cynics out there, are you on the make? Are you really just like a missionary that wants to tell the world that what we're doing wrong so that we can improve our life?
I'm a gopher. My job is really to report the words of doctors. So my organization is scouring the output from the scientific community in terms of studies, newspapers, and the whole thing. And we're using this as an opportunity. We are in another guise, our own media. So we're able to get this information out to huge numbers of people, independent of the national media. So a lot of the stories that wouldn't make it into the national media for various reasons, we can get out to people. And I was on a radio show the other night, and as you know, the whole thing with radio is conflict. So they'll wheel a doctor out, and we go at it like two ferrets up a trouser leg, and that's supposed to be entertainment for you lot. But he said, "Oh, here you are. Off you go on with this alternative health again." It's like, well, hold your horses a moment. How alternative is food? We were discussing vitamin D. How alternative is the sun? Once you stop and just start looking at the kind of language that's being used here, how, is food quackery? Because what we're talking about here is we're simply eating the wrong stuff. And we're suffering from diseases not even our livestock die from. I'll give you an example. How many times were you following a rabbit down a country lane in your headlights and it keeled over with a myocardial infarction? Our pastoral livestock don't suffer from human problems, but our dogs and cats sure do. And the reason they do is because they're being fed cooked, ground up bits of their mates. So we've got a problem with the pet food industry as well. So when you stand back and look at livestock, these diseases that we talk about, these have been cured in livestock for decades. So why have we got a problem with humans? Yeah.
You used a very topical introduction there to the last speech that you made, hold your horses. That adds to something else to the current affairs. Stable diet. No,
stable diet.
Yeah. What is it that we can do? I mean, given the fact that we want to improve our lives, I don't think anybody would say they wouldn't. But on the other hand, we also want to enjoy our lives, and everything's going to kill us one day or some way, somehow. So how can we be so, I suppose, as interested as people like yourself and Dr. Felicity, who we had on. I mean, so eager to follow these quite strictly. I don't know whether we've all got that sort of self-discipline, or is it something that will come over a period of time? Is there hope for us if we start off, say, and I know there are many of our viewers have already started, having had Felicity on with the program a couple of weeks ago, they've really made some starts, but we can't keep it up. That's the thing. Give us some advice of how to start, which foods to, I suppose, set aside. Do we drop them all at once? How can we do it and maintain the eagerness that we all have, but it wanes after a month?
That's a great question. And I think the first thing that we've got to understand is this is not about food fascism. And I think what you've got to do is pull back even further from the food and take a look at the whole situation. Let me give you an example. There are some straightforward things that every single one of your listeners can do right now that is going to start pulling them out of the crosshairs of these leading disease killers. We know this because the research has shown it for years. Let me give you an example. Tucked away on page 16 of the Daily Mail was an article that stated that if you wanted to halve the number of women dying of breast cancer in this country, then all you had to do was to get them to eat a decent diet and run around the local park till they fell over. And this study has been done many times, and the results are consistent. So diet and lifestyle. The diet is a majority plant-based system along the lines that you've heard Dr. Felicity talking about. Some people call it the Daniel Chapter 1 diet. It's a majority plant-based diet. The exercise thing I'll come back to, but there's another big player on the block that surprises an awful lot of people, and I've actually been speaking to 3 people on the phone today about this, and that's a vitamin D deficiency. Now, I don't know about you, Howard. I understand you're down in Spain, but I live in Britain, which hasn't seen the sun since 1968.
Yeah, you look a bit pale.
The problem we've got here, that's going to change soon, but the problem we've got is that I would estimate at least 90 to 95% of Brits are chronically vitamin D deficient.
Yes.
Why is this important? Because vitamin D has been found to underpin the proper workings of the immune system, cellular repair. It's so fundamental to the cell that if the vitamin D isn't right, nothing else is really going to work downstream of that.
That's interesting.
And what I find fascinating is that vitamin D is for free. So here am I talking to this doctor on the radio, and he's saying, what's your angle? What are you after? What are you trying to sell? Well, I'm trying to sell sunlight. I'm trying to get people to understand that, let's say you come from Nigeria, so you have a lot of melanin in your skin, and let's say the only place for you is Aberdeen. Now, if you go to Aberdeen, they're blue up there. I mean,
and getting rickets
you're going to have a
as
problem.
well. Getting rickets.
Yeah, because somebody who's black or brown-skinned is going to need to have more sunlight to make the same amount of vitamin D than, say, a fair-skinned Celt. What's happened is that science kind of botched the vitamin D thing. For years, vitamin D was written off as a second-division nutrient whose deficiencies were only causing the old medieval problems like soft bones and rickets. About 8 years ago, we started to see some research coming out. Dr. John Cannell was one of the top guys doing this. And suddenly we got a completely different picture of vitamin D. And the fact that vitamin D was actually not even a vitamin, it was a secosteroidal hormone, which had immense implications for the immune system and general health. Today now we know that vitamin D deficiency is linked to a whole rack of cardiovascular problems, immune system problems, 17 common types of cancer, seasonal affective disorder and depression, and you name it. There's, hundreds of studies are now being done on vitamin D. This is one of the simplest things that you can correct. And we found actually especially in the clinics, I work with clinics around the world that are getting the results, really good results, and we're finding that these clinics are putting together this whole, the great word, metabolic, everything to do with your diet, your lifestyle, your interaction with your environment. They're getting fantastic results as these other parts of the picture come together. So it's diet, it's exercise, it's vitamin D, of course, stress management. I mean, we've got an entire medical system that's only interested in the hardware, the meat. And stress, they're still arguing about whether or not stress affects your biochemistry, which is just complete nonsense that we're still arguing about something that's so fundamentally basic and straightforward. So we're failing on a fundamental level here. We're not. There's no. You know, we haven't got to wait around for some fancy laser or drug to come along. We can get to work right now to fix the basics.
Interesting you talk about the stress side of things, because we know that animals, when they're being led to slaughter, if they suffer stress, it actually affects the meat and isn't good as it should be. So therefore, that is an important factor. And we know, I'm sure there's other medical evidence that stress is very damaging to our health. Diet, exercise, all of these things. Now, Philip, this is, let's start with some of the questions that are coming in, if I may as well. And please feel free to get across tonight. I know we're only on for, part of an hour, to get as much information that you want us to have, because you should really be in the driving seat here, please. Hi Philip, my mum loves you and your book. I have severe chronic fatigue and I'm trying my best to supplement and eat healthily, but it's not enough. I'm getting my metal fillings removed. Can you advise me about possible chemical toxicity?
Yeah, great question. Chronic fatigue, the feeling that you're driving with the handbrake on. It's a very common problem. You can throw in ME and fibromyalgia and problems like that as well. Again, what clinics would do around the world when they would come across that sort of a case presented to them, first, do the obvious first. Let's get the vitamin D sorted out. That's, by the way, that's no more complicated than getting a test kit sent to you from Birmingham City Hospital Pathology Department. They have a global test kit service. So they send you a test kit for 25 quid. We're not affiliated with them at all. This is a completely separate thing that they do. And when you get the test kit, you unpack it. You just prick the underside of your second finger, put 4 blood spots on a card, send the card back to them. Within 5 to 7 working days, they will email you your D serum concentration number. Now, everybody on the planet has got a number on this D scale that runs approximately from 0 to 300. And we now know from recent research that the Goldilocks zone that we need people in for them to have this optimization of vitamin D, so as far as their immune system is concerned, vitamin D optimization has occurred, is about 150 on that scale. So if you were to test all the Hawaiian lifeguards, they'd all be at 150. And one of the most remarkable things about the sun is the fact that if you're out in the sun like lifeguards are and have unlimited supplies of sun, then it will kill off any excess on the skin. So it kind of centers you at 150. And there's an amazing design. I mean, don't get me going on design with this whole thing, but there's an incredible design that God's put into sunlight and the whole vitamin D system, which is just absolutely mind-blowing. But getting that sorted out is about being in the sunlight, or you can supplement D3 up for a month, and then you retest, and then you're in that Goldilocks zone. 150, 160, that's where we need to be. Now, with chronic fatigue, there's another issue here that we would need to know. Can I just stop you there,
Philip? Just a second.
Sure.
What are the lower figures that are showing up as an average for the UK on those?
Well, we're finding, I mean, they tested my dad. My dad went into senile dementia. When they tested him, he was 12.
What?
I mean, there was more vitamin D. There was more vitamin D in a corpse than in my dad, and we'd actually had to bully the doctor to get the test done. And when the test came back, the doctor was ashen faced. He said, "I had no idea about this because nobody tells us about this." And so I think what you're going to see, Howard, is in about, hopefully, really, really quickly, maybe 5-10 years, we're going to see these vitamin D tests are going to become as common as cholesterol tests, blood pressure gauging. It's so fundamental, and it's so easy to correct. I've seen people.
How can you correct it?
Well, you correct it.
Move to Spain.
Well, you move to Spain, but if you're not that fortunate, you just simply get hold of some vitamin D3. D3 is a standardized supplement, cholecalciferol. It's available in your local store, and you simply supplement with that, retest at the end of the month period. There's levels of supplementation. I won't get into that right now, but there's levels of supplementation that you do to move yourself from, let's say 20. I mean, we see people with cancer. I found, actually, because people send me their test results, I found 100% of people with cancer are vitamin D deficient. 100% of people with arthritis are vitamin D deficient. 100% of people with chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or screaming heebie-jeebies disease are vitamin D deficient. It's so widespread. And when I go down to Australia, which is a country with more sun than is decent, I find about 90 to 95% of that lot are deficient also because their government is telling them the sun's going to kill them.
So the sunscreen.
So they slather themselves up in carcinogenic sun cream, send their kids to school with hats on, and they're wondering why they've got a problem. And there's another big issue here. We've got probably 4 to 5 million people in this country with black or brown skin or whose religion requires them to wrap themselves up who are not getting vitamin D. And so they're wondering why they're moving into cancer and depression and all this sort of thing. And that's where we start. Let's start with the obvious, because the basics are not even being done, not on the clinical level.
You've obviously got to take some care because light, fair skins, especially those with, say, red hair, are up there on the Richter scale that are in the danger zone for receiving skin cancer.
Yeah, but here's a great study that was done in America. They found, because they wanted to know what the incidence of what I term barbecue melanoma, that would be somebody who just decides to go out on the beach and just fry themselves and end up sick, end up with melanoma. You know what they found? They found the vast majority of cases of melanoma were people who worked in offices. They found that over in America, 200,000 Americans were getting vitamin D deficient cancers each year because they stayed out of the sun because they didn't want to be one of only 1,500 who were getting the barbecue melanoma. So for every one person who's getting the classic fried in the sun melanoma situation, 200 are dying because then they're vitamin D deficient. So they're getting these problems.
My goodness.
And again, I mean, you look at how animals do it. Cats lie out in the sunlight strikes the fur, makes the vitamin D in the fur, the cat licks the fur, so do the dogs. So there's another way you can top up your vitamin D. Go around, grab a few cats. Yeah.
Okay. Some people might say they're already getting it in their food chain, but let's stick to horses.
That's very, very. Can I just address that? The amount of vitamin D you would get through the food is minimal. And here's the thing. The level of supplementation has been botched too. The RDA is 400 international units, which is worthless. It's about as meaningless as the RDA for vitamin C. We're finding that the average adult would need about 4,000 IUs a day of D3 to maintain the deficiency they've already got. So we're seeing typically doctors are taking a patient such as the person who was writing about the chronic fatigue. They would put that patient on about 10 to 15,000 IUs of D3. They're good for that for a month. They won't turn into a Smurf. And there are all kinds of levels that you gauge to get this right. Kids, for instance, is a very simple formula you can use for kids and even animals to get this right. So, there's a lot of very good science now behind this. You know what really annoys me is that it's simply not being presented to the public in a way that the public can go, wow, that's something I really needed to find out today.
Mm-hmm. Royston from Winchester asks, could Philip tell us his academic background? Perhaps it is in medicine, biochemistry, nutrition, or one of the other sciences.
I'm a researcher. So I was trained in fact, I started this whole thing as a member of the public who was fed up with members of my family dying unnecessarily, in my view, and dying badly too. So I went through Charterhouse. I was trained in biochemistry, biology, human biology. Here's one you'll like: evolution, anthropology. I came out in the top 2% of my year. But I'm a journalist. I'm an author. And I'm the end user of all of this medicine. And often doctors will say, well, why am I even speaking to you because you're not a doctor? So, well, I'm one of 5 remaining taxpayers in the UK who's paying for all of this. So you better believe I'm interested in knowing what type of medical system I'm getting and what I'm getting for my money as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the public is being really misled because they're not being told the truth about this. I think we could start getting some honesty into medicine by making sure that doctors are properly trained in nutrition and metabolic medicine.
Which leads me back to the title of one of your books, Cancer, Why We're Still Dying to Know the Truth. Very apt. Eileen writes in, as it has been proved, she says, that meat is not good for our health, would it not be wise for us all to become vegetarians?
That's a great question. The answer is, physiologically, we are omnivores, so we can eat some meat. This was a point that was picked up by Felicity in a previous program of yours. And the problem seems to be, and also Joel Furman and Neil Barnard have also gone into this. The problem seems to be the ratio at which we're consuming animal products and also the quality of what's in the meat itself. For instance, if you're eating chickens that are being jacked up with diethylstilbestrol, or we've got hormone-accelerated cattle, a lot of that stuff. I mean, when I lived in California, those big high-density feedlots where they put them in for the final 100 days, there's so many animals covering these ranches that they actually spray insecticides over them with aircraft, and so all of that is going to the food chain as well. But there is a point at which over 20 to 25% animal product intake, you start to move into the crosshairs of these typical Western diseases that we've seen. Curiously, in answer to that inquiry, we have 18 cultures who are very long-lived. Interestingly, none of them is pure vegetarian. And the actual animal protein intake does vary quite considerably. But the difference again is, are they drinking pasteurized milk or raw milk? Are these grass-fed cattle, or are these cattle that are being kept in pretty rotten conditions, drugged up before they go into the slaughter system? Mm-hmm. So this whole thing of animal protein, and again, it's interesting that we come back to this amazing scene in the beginning of the book of Daniel, where Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I know we should call them by their Jewish names, but there they are being offered the king's
choice
sweetmeat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, if you look at the language there, lots of people think this is a meat versus vegetarian argument going on in Daniel. In fact, if you look at the word is actually a Persian derivative, which means dainty or delicacy. So what Nebuchadnezzar's court were offering them were kind of what you'd find in the cake counter at Sainsbury's. And so what the boys said were, no, what we'd like is the vegetables. And in fact, the word that's being used there in the Hebrew intimates produce from seeds. So that would generally be anything grown in your kitchen garden. Mm-hmm. So this is almost, you got a little bit of a model here going on of man-made food versus God's food grown in the kitchen garden or grown outside. Mm. And I think that speaks a lot to where we are with our diet today. How much of it is really man-made and how much of it is suitable to make more of you. Mm-hmm.
And I suppose, again, balance. There are people who would find that they could eat a certain amount of meat and quite a lot of vegetables as well, and a good balance of foods. I tell you what, one thing that I see over the years that I've been watching television is you see people as they grow older. For example, politicians who are around for a long time usually. They used to be anyway. And that, you see it in their face. And you're talking about the Daniel diet. What happened there was Daniel said, O King Nebuchadnezzar, whatever his name was, please look at our countenance in a few weeks hence. And I think you will see that we fare better not eating your delicacies. He obviously put it in a very delicate way so that he didn't offend the king. And I think as I watch people on television or film stars or whatever that are around, as they get older, they get very porky and they don't look well. They don't look fit. And they tend to be chubby cheeks and fat round the neck and the gullet and everywhere else. And I think, is it not true, if somebody's on a good healthy diet and you balance that with fitness, keeping active and not so stressful, you see it in their countenance, do you not?
Once again, it comes back to, I think, people who have a problem accepting doing changes. Why should I change? This is just people pushing their views on me. I understand this because that's how I was. And I talked myself all the way up to it, to the point where I knew that my lifestyle was going to kill me. And it's all about just making changes and heading in a different direction. And it's going to be diet. For instance, if you had no better sense than just to change your diet so that 80% of what you ate was plant-based, and then that gives you 20% wiggle room. And if you're half sensible about the 20%, let's say you drink 1 liter to 1.5 liters of water a day instead of 6 cappuccinos. And let's say that you go outside and instead of not going anywhere, you actually try to do about 5,000 to 6,000 steps a day, which is quite doable. Your life would change. You would notice the difference literally in 20 to 30 days, and you'd probably start sleeping better literally in about 3 to 4 days. There's a very interesting, for those of you who want a rather interesting lesson in this, if you go onto YouTube and search under Bill Clinton Wolf Blitzer. I don't know if you've dealt with this particular point, but it's a rather interesting 9-minute interview between Wolf Blitzer of CNN and Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had to have a bypass because he was clogging up, and then the bypass began to get clogged up, and he had heard about this Daniel 1 diet, what's known as the rave diet, the diet that Felicity speaks of. And so he got hold of the doctors concerned, Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn. These are absolutely world-class physicians. And he went on this whole plant-based thing. And miracles occurred. In the interview, they actually get the doctors on and they talk about it. So this is an example. To me, that whole rave diet, the whole plant-based approach, is an excellent tool. And it's not a life sentence because you don't actually have to eat that way for the rest of your life. If you're in trouble, if you've got cancer, if you're recovering from a TIA or a stroke of any kind, or heart disease, or if you've got high blood pressure, this is a tool that will really work for you. And they say, and again, one of the doctors was saying the other night on a radio show, oh well, yeah, this is interesting. We know diets, and more studies are needed. No, they're not. They were all done in the 50s. What's interesting is that these studies don't tend to be indexed in the National Libraries of Medicine, and so they don't get to be presented to doctors. So that's why you keep hearing, oh, well, yeah, we need more studies. And that's the mantra that's trotted out. No, those studies were all done decades ago. We can move forward with it now.
Mm-hmm. We did actually show that clip with Bill Clinton
on
one of the programs with Felicity about a month ago. So it's there, and it's on YouTube as well if you want to look it up. Wolf Blitzer, wasn't it? It was the
that's it, presenter. CNN. If you just Google, just on YouTube, Bill Clinton, Wolf Blitzer diet, that'll pull it up.
Yeah, brilliant. Questions, loads of them coming in. Let's try and deal with a few. Do you think that artificial additives contribute to weight gain? This is from Dave from Charlbury.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And the other thing also is that when we're looking at the amount of junk that goes in with regular food in terms of additives and other components that are put into, say, processed foods, it's a big problem. It's a major problem. Don't get me going on aspartame, saccharin, the whole sugar thing. People say, well, all right, I've been drinking gallons and gallons of cow's milk, pasteurized cow's milk. Can I have rice milk? Can I have soya milk? My whole thing is you got weaned. And if you look up the word wean in the Oxford English Dictionary, it says no more white stuff. We've got millions of people who don't have a problem drinking cow's milk, and then we've got millions of people who do have a problem and they're lactose intolerant. It's always surprised me. I'm actually the son of a dairy farmer. It's always surprised me that if milk drinking had anything to do with logic, we should at least be drinking the milk of our own species. We should at least have factories full up with women up and down the country connected up to industrial milking equipment if we're going to drink the milk of our own species, because we're the only creature that gets weaned off our mother's milk only to spend the rest of our lives stuck under the udders of a completely different species.
On the other ones. I've got to say that for me, for a very long time, for most of my life, I would have said that it's right when people say, that cow's milk is really for baby cows, and talking of which, the colostrum, is that the right term for the mother's first delivery of, I suppose, it's not milk as such, it's colostrum, to the baby is so important that now this again was on the news today. This is part of God's creation, if you like, that the intention was to pass on to the newborn child as much to help the immune system immediately that child is born. And that's what is missing when the child or the newborn is not breastfed.
But even in this, it's become a political battlefield now, because those ladies who, for various reasons, can't breastfeed their kids are in danger, according to our government, of being offended. Because when you get the breastfeeding fascists out there, can you see what I'm saying? The whole thing just degenerates into this whole mudslinging match. And so did you notice in that article today in the press that you're pointing out, Howard, how they explained what you just said about the colostrum? And then all of a sudden they were very hasty to go to the other side of the argument, which was, well, we don't want to be dictated to because that's just going to make people feel all out of sorts if they can't make milk for their baby, and they're going to feel like they're not, doing the best thing for their child. And won't that be terrible? Instead of just stopping all of that nonsense and just saying, look, This little kid that's just been born needs to have its immune system jump-started in the way that God intended. And fine, if you can't make milk, then,
just do that. At least
there are some
make that.
workarounds,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Just
Instead of getting all bent out of shape. And honestly, I say to everybody when I do my talks, there's always something in my talk to offend everyone, because it's impossible to do anything today without offending anybody at all.
You should try running a Christian television station, my friend.
I'm sure, Howard. I think it's that's just human nature, isn't it?
It is.
At its best.
Julie writes in, she says, I've had a sweet tooth most of my life, and I've got to say that was me too. Why have I got it? How do I change it? I've had a hysterectomy in 1994. I also have MS. I don't worry about it, but I do like to deal with it. How I don't know how or something. I don't. Anyway, Julie, do you actually have any advice for people who, if you like, have been weaned onto a sugary diet from birth almost, which some of us have?
There's a lady called Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She's a Russian-trained neurologist, and she is into gut flora in a big way. And I'm sure that many of our listeners will know about Staphylococcus and Candida albicans. Candida is a big player behind cancer. And Candida gets stirred up in the gut when people feel like they want to have that Mars bar moment, and that I've got to have some sugar. Mm-hmm. That can be the fungi or the Candida sending you for takeout. They secrete mycotoxins, which cause this, I must go out and have something sweet to eat. They're effectively sending you for takeout. It's very common to have cancer. I'm told by the clinics all the time, it's very common for cancer patients to crave sugar because cancer is basically fungus taking over cells and taking advantage of a poorly policed system. So the whole thing about the sugar demand, I think one of the first things I'd say to this lady is, do you suffer from gas and bloat in the bowels? Because if you do, that would be an indication of disrupted bowel flora. Dr. Natasha would basically get you onto a diet which would include fermented vegetables such as traditionally prepared sauerkraut, which is not as gruesome as it sounds at all, but it will provide literally trillions of colony-forming bacteria that can start to heal the gut. She's very famous for introducing what's known as the GAPS diet to deal with people who are suffering from ADHD, ADD, schizophrenia, the psychosis illnesses, dyspraxia, even certain types of what they term dyslexia. So the gut flora is pretty important. I was fascinated to find out during my research on DNA that only 1 in 10, we're wonderfully and fearfully made, 100 trillion cells, and about 1 in every 10 of those cells is human. 90% of us is coded for microorganisms, which I found fascinating.
Certainly didn't evolve.
DNA, yeah, so unfortunately not. We're just on the basic level. Bugs, and this is again controlled by the diet we have. And sugar, of course, is I think it's William Coder Martin was the first person to term sucrose a poison in terms of it being detrimental to life.
Yeah. Sadly, we're all suffering. Well, many of us are suffering from it. Tesco are giving treble points on Club Card for all burgers and petrol. Starting today, the deal is called Only Fuel and Horses. Sorry.
Somebody sent me an email saying that after digging up Richard III out of a Leicester Social Services parking lot, they're now hacking up Tesco's supermarket car park in an attempt to track down his horse.
Oh dear. Well, it's already eaten.
I'm sure it's in the food chain somewhere.
Yeah. Hi Philip, what is the best way to heal leaky gut? My son has CFS and a very low immune system. He eats healthy but has no energy. He has not been to school for 2 years. All the best. This is from Lee.
Lee, I was having a chat with one of the clinicians down in Australia. They get a lot of chronic fatigue down there, and the leaky gut side of it is going to be what I just was speaking about with regard to Dr. Campbell McBride's work with the gut flora. So with chronic fatigue, typically clinics would get the vitamin D angle sorted, because if you got a vitamin D test done on somebody with chronic fatigue, very commonly they're under 40. That's really significant because the immune system itself won't be working according to the research. That needs to be dealt with straight away. Leaky gut, the introduction of probiotics. Remember, pharmaceutical-grade probiotics will introduce gut flora in the billions, but we want trillions, and that's going to be from traditionally prepared fermented foods. I will absolutely recommend Dr. Natasha's website. If you just look her up on the web, I think. Can I give that out, Howard?
Yes, please do.
So,
anything we can help.
www.Natasha NATASHA.com. Lovely lady, absolute scientist, and she's one of these that is really getting the results.
Thank you. John from Nottingham wants to know the symptoms for heart disease.
Good one. There's a whole rack of different problems that you can crop up with this. I think probably the best thing to do, and I was Googling have you ever Googled yourself, Howard? I was
Sadly,
Googling myself.
yes.
I was Googling myself the other day, and there's an awful lot of rubbish written. I'm not against the medical system. And what I'd say to you, John, of Nottingham, is if you think there's a problem, go to your doctor, because they are pretty good at diagnosis. I don't have a problem with how, certain types of diagnosis methods are invasive, but they are pretty good at tracking this one down. Mm-hmm. And so if you're concerned, they can get a diagnosis done on it.
There's so many, isn't there? So many different ways that you can actually have problems there.
Everything from high blood pressure through.
If in doubt with something like that, Philip, you would say just go to see your doctor and just ask him that
I think
question.
once he turns around to you and says, okay, you've got atherosclerosis, you're clogging up inside. At that particular point, what I'm trying to get people to do is to consult a doctor who's been trained in nutrition, who can then say, okay, well, they're offering you a bypass or statins or drugs or what have you, but what you can do here is do what Dean Ornish, Caldwell Esselstyn, and Bill Clinton's doctors were recommending, and that is eat your way out of the problem, because that's the way
eat your heart out.
Eat your heart out, yeah. And it's quick. I mean, I know clinics, you go to Dr. Gabriel Cousins or any of these doctors. In fact, Neil Barnard, Joel Furman, these are people whose video clips you've been showing on the show here. These are technicians. They will just simply sit you down and say, right, this is very straightforward. Go through the diet, and you will notice the results straightforwardly. And by the way, just to stick this in, thank God for A&E, because, if somebody drops down in the supermarket opposite the Sugar Puffs, then I'm really glad we've got A&E trauma medicine. So there are areas we've made some great advances in medicine, and there's one of them, A&E trauma medicine. God forbid you get smashed up on the motorway and they have to put you back together again, for instance. They're very good at doing that. So, we've made some good advances in certain areas.
But rather than waiting for you to be put back together again, when we're talking about things which are self-inflicted, like what we eat, we are what we eat, then the onus is on us to take every step possible before we end up in A&E. So this is why so many of our viewers are so interested in this topic. Thank you for your program. Please could your guest tell us what diet does he eat in a typical day, asked Kath.
Oh, very good question. When I'm at home, it's different from when I'm eating hotel food, when I'm on tour. I look forward to my tours in Australia because the food down there is all laid out for you. And being male, I'm kind of hopeless at food preparation. I'm blessed with a wonderful wife who does that. Typically in the morning, I would up until noon just graze sparingly on fruit. So I'd have maybe a couple of clementines and a banana. And the reason for that is, have you noticed when you get up in the morning, everything is trying to get out of you? Have you noticed that? The body goes through. God has set our circadian rhythms so that we go through 3 8-hour cycles during a 24-hour period. And between 4 a.m. and 12 noon is what we call elimination. That's when the body wants to get rid of stuff. So that's the reason why when we wake up in the morning, you noticed how everything's trying to get out of you. You've got grease coming out of your feet. You've got grease coming out the backs of your knees, around the groin area, underneath the armpits, around the backs of the ears. You blow your nose, sheen of grease across your forehead. Your hair's like a straw mat. You tootle down to the bathroom for Beethoven's final movement. The whole thing is a mess, and it's trying to get out of you. And what we do is we thwart that. That's the garbage truck coming in. You want to throw the garbage sacks on. You want to get rid of this stuff. But what we do is we eat the farm fresh breakfast, which I know all too well because that was me. And so you thwart that elimination cycle. Now, I'm not saying don't have breakfast, but what you want to do in the morning, and try this out just for 5 days, you'll notice amazing difference in how you feel, is give the body an easy time up until noon to allow that elimination cycle to do its thing. And then start your eating cycle in earnest at 12 noon. And then from 12 noon round to 8 p.m. is typically the appropriation cycle. This is when the eating cycle is. Notice that it's 8 hours. And what they've also found is that if you can compress your eating cycle into 8 hours, that does wonders for insulin and evening out sugar levels in the body as well. And then from 8 o'clock in the evening, try to get to bed sort of 10:30. And you'll notice a big difference just if you start lining up those cycles straightforwardly. That's what I did, and I noticed just within the space, I'd suffered from chronic inflammation. I just felt like I was, just bloating out all the time. And the moment I started eating according to those cycles, some of you might remember there was a book called Fit for Life that came out in the 80s that was pushing this whole thing. It's actually quite an old concept that goes back to the 1920s, but it's very important. So I'll typically do fruit before noon, and then at noon I'll have a nice salad. But I'll be eating small meals during the afternoon up until an evening meal at say 6:37. That's it. I'm usually in bed by 10:30, and then I'm up again at 6.
So you do get an 8-hour sleep. Okay, let me ask you this, just to pick on that. Fruit for breakfast as such, before noon or by noon?
Yeah, but not tankfuls of it. Just, you'll notice
Say
that,
a banana. Would you get up, if you're going to work or you need some energy, some people would say that that's the best time to have your best meal. But like myself, I'm not very good in the morning eating, but I will have a banana or some other fruit, but not a lot. Yep.
It depends. I mean, if, I get builders ringing me up. Oh, Philip, don't think I'm going to go out and start hawking scaffolding around on a banana or a piece of kiwi fruit. And that's not what I'm saying at all. If you've got a heavy workload coming up in the morning and you need some energy. But what I will say also is that in terms of hunger, analyze the hunger, because I did a lot of research with a fantastic Iranian doctor, Dr. Feridun Batman-Gelik. He's known as Dr. Batman, the water doctor. And he showed that a lot of hunger pangs were in fact cries for water, that we've mistaken hunger pangs for dehydration and vice versa. So what I say to people is usually when you wake up in the morning, try to drink a fair bit of water first thing, just over the space of about half an hour or so. And if you want to sit down and have breakfast or just a little bit of this or a little bit of that, fine. Just try not to make it 3 herds of wildebeest and half the Serengeti before noon, because that's just going to clog up the entire cleaning out process that the body's trying to do.
Okay.
Try it for 5 days and then see how you feel.
Good advice. Greetings, says Elizabeth. Is tin food bad if the contents are wholesome, i.e. tin tuna, salmon, fruit in its own juice, or does the tin contaminate what is inside? That's another problem.
That's a great question. Number one, it depends what the tin's made of. If it's aluminium, we've got a problem. The other thing also is a lot of this commercial low-grade tuna is pretty high in methyl mercury. And so what we've got here is we've got a situation cropping up with the fish, especially farmed fish or commercially raised fish, where there's a fair amount of bacterial contamination in these products. Methyl mercury concerns. I'm not at the point that some of my colleagues are just yet saying that we shouldn't eat fish ever again because of the pollution in the oceans. I think we're heading in that direction, and I think if you like fish or you like those types of foods, what you need to try to go for is the cold caught markets. Try to find out a little bit about. Fish don't come with passports, I know, but I think if you like fish and you have a market close to you where it's being hooked out of the sea, it's worth finding out where these come from, because there are concerns.
You can't mix it up with horse meat, that's for sure.
No, it doesn't go too well.
Very interesting, says Gordon. He says, I have Lewis-Sumner syndrome. No doctor has ever raised the issue of nutrition, and I'm truly shocked by all of this. I will go back to my GP. Would do any good, or should I find my own research? Thanks for the program. Gordon.
What I would do, first of all, is to find a physician who's aware of the nutritional and metabolic approach to this. There are these doctors around, and we refer into as many as we find. We don't ever charge for any of this. We don't do that at all. We have to remain, the Campaign for Truth in Medicine, by the way, has to remain independent of external financing in order for us to be able to do our work. Well, what I'd say to that kind of a situation, and often people say I suffer from, and then they give me a disease name, I've never even heard of that. I mean, I go down to Australia, and they suffer from stuff down there that must have come from Pluto. Never heard of any of it. But the first thing to do is to cover those obvious bases. Do the vitamin D. Let's look at the diet. Have you got other problems going on in the body seemingly unconnected? Was there a major stress event that hit you that took you down hard emotionally? What we call an emotional non-linearity, a one-off event, a death in the family, bankruptcy, divorce. Something took you down hard, because that is known to really jolt the immune system. And so we would look for that. We would try to find some sort of, without stretching too much, we'd try to find some sort of cause that might have hit you. Had you got a history of, did you get glandular fever when you were 15 and stressed out at school? You know, this sort of thing. Get a bit of a history on that. That's what a metabolic doctor would do. He would get some history on you, and he would do the things. If you go down to your local community medical center, they're not going to do this. They're not going to sit down with you and say, so did you have did somebody die, or what happened, and kind of get into your life a bit. They're not going to do that. But the whole stress angle to this, the software, fascinating subject in itself.
Sadly, we're coming to the last few minutes of the program, Philip. You've got to come back on again. You've got so much information, and we literally got...
I might just come all the way down there.
Yeah, so you could do with a bit of vitamin D.
Have a bit of a top-up.
There you go. This next one coming in. Hi, please could you tell me, is coconut and its oil really bad for the heart and cardio system, says Ken?
No, it's not. It's brilliant. And coconut oil is one of the most misunderstood foods, and it gets totally demonized because it's quote-unquote saturated fat. If you just Google up coconut oil research, there's a number of very, very good sites out there. Perhaps one of the good ones is Dr. Bruce Fife, who's done a huge amount of research on coconut oil and showing how medium-chain triglycerides in oil and the lauric acid in coconut oil is just brilliant for the body. And also there's this old Indian technique called oil pulling. We probably haven't got time to get into that, but this is a way that you just swill coconut oil around the mouth for about 15 to 20 minutes. So those of you who are interested in that, in terms of getting rid of kind of contamination in the mouth, which is a systemic problem now. We've got adverts, toothpaste adverts saying, did you realize that your oral health affects all of your body, which we've known for only 80 years, but they're selling that as something new. Oil pulling is a very useful technique, very straightforward to do. So coconut oil is a resounding big green tick as far as I'm concerned.
Literally 20 seconds, but just answer the question to this. Is it okay to take vitamin D tablet in tablet form, vitamin D in tablet form? Yes or no?
Yes.
That's it. Philip,
they normally cut. That's good. Yeah, no problem.
We're at the end of the program. I want to say to all of you, sorry that we didn't get through all your emails. We'll have Philip back very shortly, but thank you for watching the Q&A show. Look after yourself. Your health is very important, but look at the Bible and what that says as well. Thank you very much.